Ahora continuamos.
They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from the ones you protected. But I wasn't prepared for how cold it would feel when it came gift-wrapped in applause. I was standing near the back of the ballroom, far from the flower arches and champagne towers, watching Rachel glide across the parquet floor in her ivory dress.
María,
22 years of
¿Cómo vas?
band-aids, bedtime stories, and ballet rehearsals had led to this moment.
Gracias.
I wasn't her biological father, but I was the one who drove her to swim practice at 5 a.m., filled out FAFSA forms, held her through 2 breakups, and paid for the entire wedding. I didn't need a spotlight. I just wanted a smile, a glance, a thank you maybe. Instead, her mother, Monica, clinked her wine glass and took the mic with the grace of a snake oil preacher. "Well, what a beautiful day," she began, hair sprayed to hell and voice dripping with Chardonnay-fueled bravado. "Let's raise our glasses to family, to real family." People chuckled politely. "And of course," she added, turning toward me without even looking, "let's thank her father. You know, her real one, and not just the stepdad who tagged along all these years." Scattered laughter, the kind people offer when they're too polite to gasp. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I simply placed my glass down, adjusted my cuff, and walked out the double doors. Quiet, polite, like a damn ghost at my own daughter's wedding. I don't need to tell you what it feels like to be erased by people who wouldn't have made it this far without you. Some of you already know. And if you've made it this far into the story, take a second to follow along. Over 90% listen without subscribing, and every single one helps our team bring these stories to life with more care, more power. It keeps us going. Back outside, the air was cool. The kind of chill that doesn't sting, just reminds you you're alive. I walked past the valet stand, down the street, not even sure where I was going. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I was done. It's a strange thing, realizing you're the only adult in a room full of people clapping for lies. I didn't have a ride. My suit jacket was too thin, but I walked anyway, down the long sidewalk past rows of black SUVs and flower delivery vans. That's when I heard someone behind me call out, calm, deliberate. "Sir." I turned. He was older, late 60s maybe, lean, gray hair neatly parted, sharp suit, wedding program still in hand. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to own the room. He walked up beside me like we'd known each other for years. "I'm Franklin," he said, "father of the groom." I nodded. He looked down the sidewalk, then back at me. "Walk with me." There was no pity in his voice, no forced sympathy, just an observation, like he'd seen something that made him shift entirely. We walked past a bakery that had closed for the evening, and he asked just one thing. "Don't speak to anyone yet. Let me look into something first." No explanation, no details, just that. Then he stopped walking. "Please," he added softly. "Let me." I said nothing, just nodded again. And that's when I realized someone else had been watching the cracks in the paint long before they started peeling. See, Monica thought she could rewrite the past by standing at a podium and tossing out a line. She thought no one would remember who paid the caterer, who moved Rachel into her first dorm, who stayed when her real father forgot birthdays and court-ordered visitation. But someone did. Someone who had a better seat than I ever did, and a better view of what was really going on. And that's when everything began to shift. Quietly, without permission, without fanfare. Because when a man who has held his tongue for decades finally decides to stop protecting people who never protected him, you better believe he won't just burn the bridge. He'll sell the land underneath it. We walked in silence for maybe half a block. The air had that damp, post-rain feeling, like everything was clean on the surface, but if you peeled back the top layer, the rot was still waiting underneath. My shoes clicked against the wet pavement. His didn't. Leather soles. Expensive. The kind of man who didn't have to explain his choices. People just assumed he was right. "Franklin Barrow," he finally said. Extending a hand like this was a businessman, not a man-to-man walk after a public castration. I shook it. "You're the one who raised Rachel," he added. "She mentioned you once. Years ago. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a backhanded condolence, a quiet, kids don't understand. Or worse, the usual faux wisdom men his age love to offer about letting it go. Instead, he said, "You paid for the wedding, didn't you?" I looked at him. He nodded to himself like that confirmed something. The wine, that particular vineyard. Monica's never had that kind of palate. And those chairs, solid walnut. You have to request those 6 months out. There's no way her side covered that. And certainly not the linens. Egyptian cotton, gold-edged stitching. Someone's been investing in her image. Still, I said nothing. Franklin took out a small notepad, real paper, not an app, and scribbled something. I deal with numbers, logistics, procurement. I notice when things don't line up. Another beat of silence. I also noticed your name wasn't on the program, he added, or the table assignments, or the invitation I received. Odd, don't you think? For someone footing the bill. He stopped walking, looked out at the edge of the street where traffic lights blinked lazily in the distance. I know what that kind of erasure looks like, he said, voice low. I saw it happen to my brother. His wife kept his son from him for 9 years. Told the kid his stepfather did all the raising. That boy only found out the truth when the stepfather's will came through. My brother had been quietly funding the whole household for over a decade. He looked back at me. When someone rewrites history like that, they usually slip up somewhere. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a folded square of paper. I unfolded it. A receipt. $12,652. Wedding photographer deposit. Paid by ACH transfer. My name on the line. I raised an eyebrow. Franklin shrugged. Public records are still public. Most people forget that. I handed the paper back. He waved it off. Keep it. You might need it. We started walking again. You said you'd do some digging. I said finally, breaking the silence. He nodded. Already started. How do I know I can trust you? He smiled. Not warm. More like someone closing a briefcase after a job well done. You don't, he said. But I'm not doing this for you. I stopped walking. He turned slightly. I'm doing this for my son. He deserves to know what kind of people he's marrying into. If someone's rewriting the past now, while they rewrite when he's got 2 kids and a mortgage. There was no arrogance in his voice, just clarity, like he'd played this game before and won. So what now? I asked. He folded his program, slid it into his inside pocket like it was a dossier. Now you stay quiet. Don't call anyone. Don't confront. Don't apologize for walking out. Let them stew. The silence will eat at them faster than any confrontation. Then he paused and added, and when I call you, pick up. He turned and walked back the way we came, unbothered, hands in his pockets like he was just out for an evening stroll. I stood there for a while longer, watching the condensation from my breath disappear into the night. It wasn't just the toast that had changed things. It was what happened after. The silence that followed. The walk that shifted something no speech ever could. I'd come to that wedding thinking I'd be background noise. A placeholder for the man who never showed up. But now, for the first time in a long time, someone had seen the part one played. And worse, for them, someone had started asking why they tried so hard to hide it. Franklin wasn't a sentimental man. His wife used to joke that he'd analyze their anniversary dinner like a quarterly report. Good presentation, slightly underseasoned, delivery, 5 minutes late. He wasn't the guy who cried during father-daughter dances or posted grainy Facebook photos captioned, "My heart." But he was the kind of man who could spot fraud before it hit the books, and the wedding he'd just left reeked of it. By the time he got back to his hotel room, an executive suite paid for out of his own pocket, despite the bride's mother assuring him everything's covered, he'd already compiled a mental list. First red flag. There were no thank you speeches from the bride that included my stepdad, not even a passing mention. Second, Monica had her hand in every vendor detail, but her numbers didn't add up. Franklin knew luxury when he saw it, and he also knew what Monica's salary at her mid-tier HR consulting firm probably was. He pulled out the wedding program from his jacket, flattened it across the desk, and began making calls. First, the event planner. No answer. Next, the catering company. A sleepy-sounding assistant confirmed they had received full payment 6 months ago. Franklin asked for a copy of the invoice. The assistant hesitated. He gave his name and title, Franklin Barrow, logistics executive at Abernathy Freight Group, which worked as always. The PDF came through in under 5 minutes. He clicked it open. Paid in full by wire transfer. Sender, D. T. Mallory. Franklin stared at the name. It didn't match Monica, and it definitely didn't match Rachel. Another vendor. This time, the floral designer. Those absurd $14,000 centerpiece monstrosities with imported orchids that didn't even match the bridesmaids' colors. Same story. Paid by the same account. D. T. Mallory. He paused. Mallory. He'd heard that name. Back to the wedding program. He scanned the page again. No mention of anyone named Mallory. Then he remembered, when they walked to the curb earlier that evening, the man he'd spoken to had been introduced to him just once, years ago, when Rachel was still an undergrad. Monica had mentioned him offhandedly. Her stepdad, Darren Mallory, still tries to play dad. Franklin leaned back in his chair. Still tries? He clicked through to his own guest RSVP email. The sender was listed as Rachel and Connor at perfectunion.events. Clicking through the source headers, He traced the domain registration. Registered by Monica K. Henley. No one else. Franklin smiled to himself. Sloppy. He opened a new browser tab and pulled up a background check portal he'd had access to since his days working in logistics compliance audits. Mallory, Darren T., cross-referenced with the billing accounts. Verified. Same man. Same bank. In under an hour, Franklin had uncovered 5 vendor payments made by the stepfather, each in the thousands, each conveniently omitted from any mention in the wedding materials. He turned back to the program and underlined something that now stood out like blood on a white shirt. Father of the bride, left blank. It wasn't a clerical error. It was an edit, a deletion, a choice. He didn't know the whole story yet, but he knew enough. Enough to see that this wasn't just a matter of forgetting to thank someone. It was strategic, intentional. Someone had been funding a wedding they weren't even supposed to be visible in. Franklin poured himself a bourbon from the minibar, sat on the edge of the bed. He'd seen this before in business. When a silent partner gets squeezed out, not with a fight, but with a smile and a new logo. And he knew how that always ends. With lawsuits, with frozen accounts, with reputations quietly set on fire. He didn't know what the stepfather planned to do. Hell, the man hadn't said more than 3 sentences during their walk. But Franklin had a sinking feeling that when he finally did decide to speak, he wouldn't be yelling. He'd be reading from a file. The bridal suite still smelled like hairspray and overpriced roses. Rachel had kicked off her heels, the hem of her dress slightly damp from the brief drizzle outside. And Connor, Franklin's son, was nursing a glass of champagne that had long since lost its fizz. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that usually follows applause, or in this case, something much colder. Franklin entered without knocking. He never knocked when he knew he was right. Connor, Rachel, I need a moment, he said. Rachel looked up, caught somewhere between bliss and confusion. She glanced at her new husband as if he'd have the script. He didn't. Franklin walked to the vanity, set down a folder, and remained standing. Who paid for this wedding? He asked, voice neutral. Rachel blinked. My mom and I handled everything, she said quickly, a little too quickly. We split some things, and we had help from who? Franklin cut in, still calm. Rachel paused. I mean, you helped with the venue. No, Franklin said, flipping open the folder. I paid for my suite, my tux, and my own dinner plate. You paid nothing. And your mother? Well, she paid for a narrative. He slid a printed invoice across the table. The florist. Then another. The caterer. A third. Photography. $8,000. Pre-editing. Each stamp. Paid by D. T. Mallory. Rachel's expression faltered. She didn't reach for the papers. Just stared like they were slowly catching fire. Connor shifted uncomfortably, eyes narrowing. Who's Mallory? Your father-in-law, Franklin answered, never looking at him. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it again. She sat down on the edge of the chaise, suddenly smaller in her lace and pearls. I don't understand, Connor said. Franklin turned to him. The man you watched walk out earlier tonight? That's Darren Mallory, stepdad, according to Monica, according to public records, financial statements, and the IRS. He's the primary benefactor of this entire circus. And yet, he pulled out one final sheet, a page from the guest list, the one the planner had emailed weeks ago, next to Darren Mallory's name, handwritten in sharp black ink, not family, removed from formal list. Franklin let that hang. Rachel looked like she'd swallowed glass. I didn't write that, she said, too quickly. It wasn't me. Franklin raised an eyebrow. It had to be my mom, she added. She handled the RSVPs. Connor looked at her now. Really looked. You let him pay for everything, Franklin said, and then let him be excluded from the program, the photos, the toasts. Rachel, this wasn't an oversight. This was choreography. Tears welled in her eyes, but Franklin didn't soften. This is the man who put you through college, who sent checks for your textbooks before you even asked. I saw the ledger. You had him pay for the rehearsal dinner. Then your mother makes that speech about real family. Connor spoke, low and careful. Is this true? Rachel nodded, eyes down. Franklin took a breath. You married my son under the pretense of gratitude and tradition. But I see now it was all performance. Because the man who raised you, who stayed, you made sure he wasn't just hidden. You picked up the papers. You tried to erase him. Rachel stood abruptly. I didn't mean to. But you did, Franklin said. And the difference between an accident and a decision is repetition. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. I can't tell you what to do next. But I can tell you this. You owe that man more than a seat at the back of the room. Then, quietly, And you may find, soon, that he's not waiting to be invited back in. The door closed behind him, softly. In the silence that followed, Rachel didn't cry. She just stared at the empty chair in the corner, where a man once sat during her high school piano recitals, applauding with pride no one else thought to bring. And now, she realized, he had finally stopped clapping. Monica was exactly where Franklin expected to find her, leaning against the open bar, drink in hand, holding court among a small cluster of guests who hadn't yet figured out the wedding had turned septic. Her laugh carried that brittle sharpness of someone trying too hard to sound unfazed. Lipstick smudged the rim of her wine glass. Another Chardonnay, third since dessert. He waited for the bartender to step away before approaching. "I'd like a word," Franklin said, tone clipped quiet. She turned, her face performing a polite smile that barely lasted a second. "Franklin," she said with feigned warmth. "What's the matter? Connor's not having second thoughts already." He didn't respond. Instead, he set a single sheet of paper on the bar beside her wine glass. "The florist invoice. Paid in full. 8 months ago," he said. "By Darren Mallory." She glanced at it, then looked back at him, unbothered. "Okay, he paid for a few things. He likes to feel useful." Franklin didn't blink. "Useful?" Monica shrugged. He was never really close with Rachel. "It's not my fault he kept trying to play dad when she didn't need one." "Right," Franklin said evenly. Except he wasn't trying. He was doing. For over 2 decades. Paying, showing up, staying. What were you doing, Monica? Filling out checks with his routing number and pretending it was yours. Her face changed, just a flicker. Defensive. He offered. Did he offer to be removed from the guest list? From the ceremony? From the family photos? She set her drink down, slower this time. "Listen," she said, keeping her voice low. "This is my daughter's day. I'm not going to let you turn it into some melodrama." Franklin pulled out another document, the vendor ledger he'd compiled. He laid it next to the first. Catering, photography, decorations, invitations, venue deposit, all with one thing in common. Paid by a man who wasn't even invited to give a toast. Monica picked up the wine glass, tried to sip, then set it back down when she noticed her hand trembled. "You don't understand their relationship," she said, eyes narrowing. "He always made it about himself. Always tried to outshine me." Franklin stepped in closer, his voice so quiet it almost made her lean in. "If you keep lying," he said, "I'll speak. And I won't whisper." She froze. "I don't care about your little games, Monica. I care about what this does to my son. He married a woman raised on a mission and performance. Raised by you. And if this continues, I will make it known. To every guest here. To every vendor. To the trustees who manage Rachel's educational brand. And to the tax auditors who will be real interested in how someone on a mid-level HR salary threw a 6-figure wedding and claimed the deduction." Her jaw tightened. "You wouldn't." "I would," Franklin said. "And you know I can't." For the first time that evening, Monica looked genuinely cornered. No more fake smiles. No more casual deflections. Just a quiet realization that the man in front of her wasn't playing the part of an upset in-law. He was reading the script out loud, the one she'd hoped no one else had a copy of. Franklin gathered the papers, folded them neatly. "I'll give you until morning," he said, "to fix what can still be fixed. After that, this becomes public, because the man you erased may not care about your embarrassment, but I guarantee I do." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Monica alone at the bar. She didn't finish her drink. She didn't rejoin her guests. She just stared at the papers on the counter, like they were written in a language she thought she'd buried years ago, and now couldn't afford not to understand. The reception hall had the soft, surreal lighting of a dream you start to wake from. Fairy lights dangling like fireflies, jazz humming in the background, champagne flutes clinking as conversations ebbed and flowed in scripted joy. The dance floor was empty for the moment, just polished wood and shadows. A photographer crouched near the cake, capturing detail shots before the first slice. Then Franklin stepped onto the stage. No microphone check, no speech card, just a man in a crisp navy suit who carried more gravity in his silence than most people did with a spotlight. The band trailed off mid-riff. Conversations stuttered to a halt. One by one, the guests turned their heads. Monica spotted him first from her table near the front. Her expression sharpened. Rachel was beside her, smiling toward the crowd, still believing this was a moment to remember for the right reasons. Franklin's voice cut through the room like a blade through tool. "My name is Franklin Barrow," he began. "Some of you know me. Some of you smiled at me tonight, clink glasses. Some of you think I paid for this reception." A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Monica's eyes flared. I didn't, Franklin continued, but I did investigate who did, and what I found changes things. Rachel straightened in her seat. Connor, beside her, slowly set down his drink. Franklin held up a thick manila folder and let it thud gently onto the podium. This wedding, he said, was funded, almost entirely, by the man you watched walk out of here earlier this evening. The man listed nowhere in the program. The man called not family in a speech that was, frankly, one of the ugliest things I've witnessed at an event meant to honor love. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the tables. He opened the folder and began laying down the documents. Florist, $12, $500. Paid by Darren T. Mallory. Catering, $28,000. Paid by the same. Photography, decor, music licensing, rehearsal dinner, even the embossed invites on your tables, paid. All of it. Every check written, every transaction signed, by the man deliberately excluded from the very celebration he made possible. Rachel stood up. Franklin, wait. He held up a hand. I'm not finished. He picked up one final paper, slightly worn at the edges. A trust account breakdown. Rachel's college tuition, years 1 through 4, paid by the same man. I verified the financial statements, the routing number, all traceable, all silent, and all ignored. Connor looked from Franklin to Rachel, then to Monica, who now looked like she was calculating exit routes rather than explanations. Why are you doing this now? Monica hissed across the room. This is not the place. Franklin nodded. Correct. The place for this was during the speeches, during the father-daughter dance, during any moment where decency would dictate the man who raised your daughter be acknowledged. He turned to the crowd, calm. My family does not celebrate lies, so this wedding is paused. The word landed like a dropped chandelier. Someone dropped their fork. A glass cracked. The DJ slowly removed his headphones. Rachel stepped forward, face pale. Please, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't ruin this. Franklin looked at her, really looked. Not with cruelty, not even judgment. Just the clear eyes of a man who'd lived too long to be tricked by lace and lighting. I didn't ruin this, he said. You did, when you cut out the man who built all of this. And now, he gathered the final document, tapped it once against the podium, and placed it at the top of the stack. Now watch what falls. He left the folder there, walked off the stage. No applause, no music, just silence that stretched, heavy and slow, across a room where love had been the performance, and truth had just taken the mic. And somewhere, in the back, one guest whispered to another, "Who the hell is Darren Mallory?" And the answer, unspoken but deeply felt, was, the only real man in the room. The night had turned thick with that cloying silence only found after something sacred collapses. The reception hall emptied like a leaking balloon. Guests murmuring excuses, avoiding eye contact, pretending they had early flights or babysitters. No bouquet toss, no cake cutting, just exits and unclaimed favors. In the parking lot, Rachel's hands trembled as she fumbled with her phone. He's not answering, she said. Try again, Monica barked, already opening the car door. Connor was a few feet behind, looking like someone had just yanked him out of a movie halfway through the wedding montage. He left early. He's probably at home, brooding. Monica snapped. Like always. He's not sulking, Rachel muttered. Monica ignored her. I'll drive. Rachel hesitated, then got in the front seat. Connor climbed into his own car and followed, headlights trailing behind like a reluctant conscience. The drive was quiet, too quiet. Rachel stared out the window, watching streetlights blur by like chapters of a book she'd never bothered to read. They pulled into the cul-de-sac just past midnight. Darren's house sat like it always had, modest, clean, every light off except the porch. No movement, no silhouette in the front window. Rachel stepped out first. She stood there, blinking at the stillness. Something felt final, not angry, not wounded, just done. Monica marched up to the front door, heels clacking like they had something to prove. She rang once, twice, then started banging. Darren, open the damn door. No answer. She turned to Rachel. He's being dramatic. Rachel shook her head slowly. Monica knocked again, louder this time. You don't get to run away from this. We need to talk. Still nothing. Rachel tried her phone again, straight to voicemail. See, Monica said, stepping back. He always does this. Every time someone calls him out. Stop, Rachel said. Her voice was soft. Not a plea, just a statement. Monica narrowed her eyes. What? He's not sulking, Rachel said again. He's gone. Not for the night. For good. Monica scoffed. Oh, please. He'll be back. He always comes back. That's his thing. Rachel turned and looked at the window. She remembered the couch inside, the bookshelf he'd built by hand, the framed photos, each one carefully curated, painfully respectful, always placing her in the center. He wasn't coming back, because he hadn't left in anger. He'd left through it. Behind them, Connor pulled into the curb. He got out, but didn't approach, watching instead as Monica paced the porch like a woman losing control of a script she'd written years ago. From across the street, a porch light flicked on. An old neighbor stepped out in his slippers, holding a coffee mug and a quiet frown. "You looking for Darren?" the man asked. "Yes," Monica barked. "Is he home?" The neighbor shook his head. "Nope. Left about 2 hours ago. Packed a duffel bag and 2 boxes. Took the old pickup." "Where'd he go?" Rachel asked. The neighbor shrugged. "Didn't say. Just nodded at me. That was it." Monica scoffed. "He'll be back. He can't help himself." The neighbor didn't answer. Just sipped his coffee, took one more look at the 3 figures on the porch. Monica loud, Rachel still, Connor uncertain. Then turned and went back inside. The porch light blinked off. Rachel sat on the steps. The air was cold, but didn't bite. She felt it all now. Not the fear of him leaving, but the weight of how easy it had been to take him for granted. Her phone buzzed. A text from a blocked number. No message, just an image. A photo of her as a kid, maybe 8 or 9, asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket she vaguely remembered. On the floor beside her, a man, Darren, sitting, back against the couch, also asleep, hand loosely holding a stuffed rabbit she'd carried everywhere back then. No caption, no name, just the image. She stared at it for a long time. Behind her, Monica lit a cigarette with shaking hands. And Rachel realized something she'd never been brave enough to admit. Darren hadn't closed the door on them. He'd simply stopped waiting for someone else to open it. Monica was still in her robe when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that cut through the early morning quiet like a gavel. She padded to the door, barefoot, mascara smudged beneath her eyes from the previous night's unraveling. She assumed it was Rachel, maybe back with a hangover apology or a tearful question about where he went. Instead, a man in a charcoal suit stood on the stoop, briefcase in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. "Monica Henley?" he asked, checking the file. Her eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "I'm Mark Ellison, from Hallbrook Legal." He replied, tone crisp. "You're being served." "Served?" she scoffed. "For what?" He handed her the envelope. Per Clause 4.3 of the Mallory Henley Trust Agreement, all distributions are suspended pending investigation into fraudulent representation and exclusion of co-beneficiary party. She stared at him blankly, like he was reading Latin. What trust? What fraud?" Mark adjusted his cuffs. "You and your daughter have both been receiving disbursements from a family trust originally structured by Darren Mallory. As of today, those payments are halted. Retroactive audits have also been initiated." "Excuse me." Monica snapped, color draining from her face. "He can't do that. That trust was filed jointly," the lawyer interrupted, "and modified once, by both parties. You may recall signing the agreement 10 years ago. I have a copy. I'm his ex-wife. You're also a trustee with fiduciary responsibility, which includes honest representation. You referred to Mr. Mallory as not family, publicly. That triggered a clause tied to intent and identity." He flipped open his folder. Clause 7B. If any beneficiary or co-trustee is willfully misrepresented as unrelated for material gain, the trust may be frozen until clarity is established. Monica opened her mouth, closed it, and looked down at the paperwork like it might vanish if she blinked long enough. The lawyer didn't flinch. "Until this is resolved, you cannot access the remaining balance. That includes the housing subsidy, Rachel's deferred tuition payments, or any further wedding-related reimbursements." She laughed, short and desperate. "This is ridiculous. You're just doing Franklin's dirty work." Mark reached into his briefcase and removed a single post-it note. "Mr. Barrow did send along a message," he said, placing it gently on the kitchen counter. In Franklin's handwriting, printed neatly in all caps. "This is what happens when men who stay are erased by people who didn't." Monica didn't move. The lawyer packed up, offered a polite nod, and exited without further word. She stood there for a long time, papers limp in her hands, the legalese bleeding together in her mind. Fraudulent representation, co-beneficiary, intent, misrepresentation, suspended disbursements, Clause 7B, Clause 7B, Clause 7B. From the living room, Rachel emerged, still in the same wrinkled bridesmaid pajamas she'd slept in. Her hair was a mess, her phone in her hand. She looked at her mother. What was that? Monica didn't answer, just handed her the papers. Rachel scanned the first page, then looked up sharply. Wait, this is the trust. Why would he freeze the... She stopped. Read the clause again. He heard the speech, she whispered. Monica sat down slowly, as if the weight of her own erasure had finally found her shoulders. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. Rachel dropped into the seat across from her, eyes distant. He said nothing, she muttered. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He didn't even look angry. No, Monica said. He just left, and took everything with him. Outside, the wind picked up. A single petal from Rachel's bridal bouquet, forgotten on the porch, lifted into the air and drifted into the street. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy reading the fine print. The one line they never thought would matter. The clause that wasn't meant to be triggered. But Darren Mallory wasn't angry. He was prepared. The morning after the serving, the world outside Rachel's apartment looked deceptively normal. The sky was that pale October gray that always made her feel 12 again, bundled in sweaters, waiting for caramel apple cider. Except now, her stomach churned with a different kind of nostalgia, one dipped in acid. The wedding dress still hung in its garment bag in the corner, a silent monument to a day that had detonated before she could even cut the cake. She hadn't eaten since the reception. She hadn't spoken to Connor since Franklin's speech. And she couldn't bear to open her phone again. Hundreds of messages, none from the one person she couldn't stop seeing in her mind. Then came the soft knock at the door. Not the panic bang of her mother. Not the impatient buzz of deliveries. Just one knock. Rachel shuffled to the door, barefoot, hoodie draped over her pajamas, hair unwashed, eyes hollow. When she opened it, there was no one there. Only an envelope on the mat. No postage, no name, no return address. Just a simple white envelope, thick with age, the kind you'd find in a drawer of old memories. She picked it up and opened it slowly. Inside was a single photo. She was maybe 4 years old in it, a little thing with messy bangs and Velcro sneakers. Sitting on Darren's lap, giggling, one hand wrapped around a plastic toy microscope. Behind them, the giant T-Rex skeleton from the State Science Museum loomed. She remembered that day, barely. She'd spilled juice on her socks and cried when the planetarium lights went dark. Darren had carried her the whole way home, humming the same off-key tune he always used when she was afraid of the dark. Beneath the photo was a small, folded note in his handwriting. Block letters. Clean. No emotion in the shape of the letters, but too much in the space between them. I gave everything, even when I wasn't asked. What you took wasn't money. It was meaning. No name. No sign-off. Not even the familiar D he used when scribbling lunch notes during school field trips. She stood there, letter in hand, as her knees gave out and she slid down the wall, landing on the floor in a pile of silence. She hadn't realized it until now, but the apology she had rehearsed for him over and over since that night wasn't going to matter, because he wasn't waiting to hear it. He wasn't angry. He was finished. That note wasn't a message. It was a final entry, a log-off. A record-keeping footnote left for someone who failed to understand the currency she'd been given until after the bank closed. She sat on the cold tile floor for nearly an hour. At some point, Monica called. She didn't answer. At some point, Connor texted. She deleted it before reading. The only thing she looked at again and again was the photo. Her on his lap, joy unfiltered, arms thrown around him like gravity itself was a game. She hadn't known then what he was giving her. Stability, presence. A quiet kind of love that never needed the spotlight, just a seat at the back of the room. And when the moment finally came to thank him, to honor that years-long sacrifice, she had let her mother take the mic, and said nothing. Now, there was nothing left to say, no number to dial, no location to visit, no moment to undo, just the photo, and the truth that she hadn't been robbed. She had thrown it away, and the worst part? She only now understood what she'd had. At the exact moment it was too late to give it back. The ballroom was smaller than the wedding venue, but far warmer, wrapped in the soft amber glow of purpose rather than performance. No flower walls, no ice sculpture initials, just rows of clean, white chairs and a stage backed by a simple navy banner. For men who stepped in, a foundation of acknowledgement and action. The guests were a quieter crowd, donors, social workers, educators, and men with tired eyes who rarely got thank yous for doing what others had abandoned. Some wore suits, others flannel and calluses. None of them smiled easily, but they all listened. Franklin stood at the podium with his reading glasses halfway down his nose, not for effect, but because he was getting older and didn't care about appearances anymore. In the third row, near the aisle, sat a young man with a scar just visible above his collar. Former foster kid, first in his family to make it to college. 2 seats down, a retired mechanic who had raised his ex-girlfriend's son as his own for 16 years until the boy joined the Navy and sent him a Father's Day letter from Guam. And near the back, half in shadow, sat Rachel. Alone. No name tag. No table assignment. She wasn't listed among the RSVPs, but she came anyway. Not to speak, not to be seen, just to witness. She hadn't seen Darren since the letter. Hadn't tried again. Hadn't responded when Franklin forwarded her a copy of the Foundation's filing, complete with the freezing of the trust, its redirection into a non-profit built in Darren's name, and the formal dissolution of her status as beneficiary. She didn't contest it. What would she even say? Now she sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, watching a stage that didn't belong to her anymore. Franklin cleared his throat. This foundation, he said, is not a story of revenge. It's not even a story of justice. It's a story about silence. Murmurs. A few heads turned. For too long, men who weren't official, who didn't share blood or last names, have done the work that others left behind. Diapers, tuition, late-night emergency room visits, holding tiny hands during court dates for custody battles they weren't even part of. He glanced at the edge of his notes. And for that, most of them got nothing. Not even a line in the thank you speech. The air went still. Rachel didn't move. Franklin turned the page. This foundation is funded entirely through a trust originally intended for a wedding. It will now provide scholarships, legal aid, and emotional support for men who stepped into fatherhood when no one else would, and were later told they didn't matter. Rachel blinked hard. Franklin set his notes down, picked up a single sheet of paper. The mission statement, as requested by our founding donor, reads as follows. He looked out across the room, not at Rachel, straight past her. This is for the men who didn't walk away until they were pushed. Silence. Then a low wave of applause, slow, sincere, like something sacred being acknowledged for the first time. Rachel didn't clap. She couldn't. Her hands were clenched in her lap, gripping the fabric of her dress so tightly her knuckles ached. Franklin stepped down from the podium and shook hands with the young man in the front row, then the mechanic, then the social worker from Baltimore who raised 3 of her brother's children. He never looked toward the back. Rachel stood quietly, slipped out the side door before the reception line. Outside, the air was cold and honest. She didn't cry. She just stood beneath a street lamp, watching her breath fog and disappear, thinking of a man who had once held her hand in parking lots and taught her how to ride a bike by letting go when she wasn't ready. Only now did she understand. He hadn't let go because she was ready. He let go because he was. And instead of turning back, he built something that would never ask for his erasure again.